Really good to be with you today. As Taylor mentioned, you are here to talk about organizational self-assessment and how you can use it as a springboard to build capacity in your community action agency. We're also going to introduce you to our new tool to help you conduct an organizational self-assessment that we developed in partnership with our friends at the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. So I'll say hello, I'm Mary Beth Schneebert-Remrev. I'm the Director of Organizational Capacity Building. I'll be joined today by my good friend and colleague, Catherine Neslagi from the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. And she'll come into the presentation a little bit later and walk you through the great new tool that we have. As we go, please do put your thoughts and questions in the chat. You can also put it in Q&A. Catherine and I are going to make a good effort to try and answer your questions throughout the session, and we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end of the session as well. Keep putting your hellos and welcomes in the chat. It's really good to see all of those and see everyone here. So before we get started, we want to take a moment to ground ourselves in the promise of community action. You can recite this along with me all over the country. I love the idea of a chorus of the promise of community action happening all at the same time. So community action changes people's lives, embodies a spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. Also want to take a moment to pay our respects and acknowledge the land from which this meeting is being held today, and pay respect to the people of that land. So we encourage you to take a moment to identify the land, whose land you are joining from, and put a message of gratitude and pay respects to its peoples in the chat. And you can put that acknowledgement in the chat, and we'll be posting the link where you can identify the native land that you are on and share your own acknowledgement. So I'd like to acknowledge that the National Community Action Partnership offices are on the lands of the Nacotchtank and Piscataway people. We pay our respects to the elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. So an agenda, what are we going to talk about today specifically? We're going to start out talking a little bit about what an organizational assessment is and why we do it. And then we will turn it over to our friend Catherine from the Nonprofit Risk Management Center to give you a review of our new organizational assessment tool that was developed specifically for community action agencies to conduct these assessments. And then we'll talk about how you can use the results of your organizational assessment in order to build capacity and make improvements in your agency. And we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the session. So with that, how about if we just dive right on in? So you may be here and say, well, what exactly is an organizational assessment? And an organizational assessment at its core is a systematic process of reviewing an organization to gain insight into its functioning and its performance. That systematic approach typically involves looking at key areas or domains of agency well-being and functioning that you would then assess performance. So that would be domains like leadership, like human resources, employee engagement and well-being, or fiscal or strategic planning, all of these domains that we know make up a healthy, functioning organization. That systematic approach would then use a survey or a review of indicators, of standardized indicators, and look at supporting documentation to assess the performance of those various domains. So there are many different approaches to an organizational assessment. Some are very high level, some are very deep, some are very simple, and some are much more rigorous. All of these different types of organizational assessment approaches involve differing levels of resources, including time, including cost, and including commitment. And so when you think about organizational assessment, and if you want to conduct one for your agency, you need to choose a method that works well for you and your organization and your goals. So we wanted to frame out a couple of types of assessments that we see in community action, just to give you some perspective about the different types that exist in the network. And we have these charted out on this axis of, in terms of how deep the assessment goes and how rigorous the assessment is. And so if we start on your far left-hand side, you see informal assessment. It's a point in time assessment where you're getting kind of a quick pulse check of how your agency is performing in those key areas that we talked about. This is usually a less rigorous type of assessment. It involves minimal documentation, but on the upside, it doesn't cost a whole lot. It's pretty easy to do, and you can do it pretty quickly to get a quick idea of where your organization stands in terms of its functioning. Moving up the chain a little bit, then you come to this structured assessment or team-based assessment. This is more rigorous. Typically, this is conducted over time. It is pretty structured, and you are assessing yourself against those indicators of organizational functioning, and just doing a deeper dive into that assessment and getting some more documentation and validating that what you're seeing. An example of a more structured approach would be our Pathways to Excellence process. In our Pathways to Excellence program, where community action agencies are working to systematize and integrate excellence practices in their community action agencies. Part of what the agencies do in that process is what we call a self-study, where they look at the 35 community action standards of excellence, which are the best in class practices from the best agencies in our network. And they assess, how are we performing in relation to these standards? How well do we think we're performing? What documentation do we have to support this? And they're diving a little bit deeper, but it's still all them. They're doing that themselves. It is still a self-assessment, but it is much more structured and has a lot more rigor to it. Moving up the chain, another step then is an external assessment. This is usually where you have a third-party reviewer who comes on site to validate how an organization is performing. Now, you can think of this in terms of an audit. Whenever you have an audit, that's someone coming in. Typically, an audit is pretty focused on fiscal and internal control kinds of practices, but that's one kind. In our Pathways to Excellence program, a team of peer reviewers, of peer community action experts come into an agency to verify that the agency is really embodying those best practices and fully systematizing them in their agencies. Another example is if any of you have ever gone for accreditation, you submit a self-study, but there's always an element where there are folks on site or a third party who is reviewing your application and certifying that what you've put down is correct. So all of this, though, I should point out, it's not assessment for assessment's sake, right? You're doing an assessment because you want to understand where you stand and then hopefully identify those areas where you're performing really well, and also those areas where you might have some room for growth, where you might need to put some focus and some resources and time and attention in order to strengthen and improve your agency. So today, we're going to focus really more so on the informal assessment that's on the far left-hand side of your screen, the yellow circle. And part of the reason for that is that these are quick and easy, they're low cost, and it's a good effort versus your return on investment, return on your time investment in this type of tool. And also that's the kind of assessment that we have built with the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. So building on this topic of why would I do this? Why would I do an organizational assessment? At its core, what an assessment will help you do is help to guide your strategies to strengthen your organization, because much like a community needs assessment, an organizational assessment can be used to understand your strengths, what resources you have, and the needs of your agencies and where you might have some room to grow. So furthering that point, we go into the culture of excellence. We believe that in a culture of excellence, every agency can improve. There's always room for improvement. No one is a complete product. We are always becoming. And so for you to improve, you can't improve if you don't measure. How do you know where you are today and where you need to go if you don't have an accurate read? So the organizational assessment is a tool that can help you benchmark where you are now. Think about that in relation to where you want to go or where you want to be, so that then you can inform your agency's improvement strategies. I want to call out that this is a commitment as well as a process. You know, we typically hear this idea of continuous quality improvement or even ROMA as, you know, the cycle, the process that we go through, but it's more than that. You really have to be committed to seeing this through. You need to have leadership, you need to have resources, and there needs to be some intentional care to constantly looking, checking, and assessing, where are we now? Where do we want to be? Let's institute a new policy. Let's check and see how that's going. Okay, now we did that, but we can always keep improving, right? So now we got to do a new assessment, identify where we can improve, and that takes energy and time. So, you know, don't think about assessment as just a one and done, but really a commitment that you're taking on. All of this is ultimately about focusing on excellence through incremental improvements that best serve our customers. Because why do we do this work if it's not for the people and the communities that we serve? And I see Erin put in the chat a little bit about our standards of excellence, because you may be sitting here and going, well, wait a minute, what does excellence look like in community action? What are the benchmarks? And those are defined in community action standards of excellence, which these standards are 35 of the best in-class practices from the best organizations in our network. And these standards really articulate the benchmarks of top performance that your agency can strive for. Our tool is built on these 35 standards of excellence, or the practices associated with those standards of excellence. And so when you are using this tool, you are really looking at yourself in the lens of an excellent agency. So excellent agencies are always looking to improve. We just established that. And a continuous improvement culture is an excellence culture. When you're working in an organization, I know, you know, you've got all kinds of domains, all kinds of different areas where you could focus. One of the great things about an organizational assessment is it helps you to target your efforts. An assessment, you know, really focuses on those areas that are of greatest need, because you're identifying where you have gaps or areas or room to grow. I want to point out too that an excellence culture is an engaged culture. That is, that we know that when we engage our employees and our stakeholders, we can make some of the best improvements to deliver value to our customers. You know, employee engagement is really essential to engaging in continuous quality improvement within the organization, because who knows our organization's functioning better than our employees? They really are our experts, and we should leverage their expertise in an assessment process. So one of the other great things about doing an organizational assessment is it's kind of a reality check. You know, are we doing as well as we think we are? I want to point out too that, you know, particularly when you have a large organization, folks may have very different perceptions of the same process in the organization, and to them, perception is their reality. That is their frame through which they engage with the organization. So one of the great things about an organizational assessment is it can help you to measure and understand the perception and gather the perceptions of your employee experts. So with that, you know, whenever you're doing an organizational assessment, any kind that you're doing, you really want to think about how you're including the perceptions of your staff, and not only leadership, but folks at all levels of your organization. Another important point around this perception versus reality is approach versus deployment. I think we've all been part of a process where we have painstakingly planned out an approach, and then when we deployed it, maybe it just didn't go quite as we planned. And sometimes that happens. We have the best of intentions, and then when the rubber meets the road, there's a challenge that we didn't foresee. So this kind of assessment can help you to understand where you might have some gaps between your intention, your approach, your strategy versus how it's actually being rolled out at the ground level. And building on an earlier point, different seats in our organization will have very different views of the same process. And one of my favorite sayings from a colleague I used to work with was, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So let me give you an example, is a timesheet process, right? A timesheet process might be fine for your staff in the office, but maybe it's really challenging and cumbersome for staff who work in the field, depending on your technology and your processes that manage that. Or fiscal policies. If you have policies where employees receive reimbursement for money that they laid out for employment, timelines may work fine for your leadership staff or your staff who have a little bit more resources to float, and not so well for some of your other staff. It's the same process, but different people, it impacts people in different ways, and how they view that process is very different. I've also seen very, very well-intentioned staff engagement practices that are received with some skepticism by employees because they're seen as out of touch, because maybe they're not aligned with what the workforce values. So an organizational assessment can really help you to dive into some of these perceptions, begin to understand them, and then inform your improvement efforts. So in the 20 minutes that I've been talking, I hope I've sold you on doing an organizational assessment. I hope I've got you excited to do one. And now you're saying, great, I want to do it. How do I do this? Where do I get started? And we have a couple of basic steps for you to consider. First, identify your goals and your scope. Before you dive into, okay, yep, we're going to do an assessment, ask yourself, what do you want to gain from this? What would a successful assessment tell you? What would you get out of it? Are there specific areas of functioning that you want to dive into? Maybe you have some particular concerns around your HR processes or your fiscal processes. Think about those areas that you really want to hone in on. Also consider if your assessment is going to be organization-wide, or maybe a particular division, or focused on certain domains of organizational functioning. Now, a caveat I will give is that I think it's very important for us as CAAs to do an agency-wide assessment, the same way we do an agency-wide risk assessment. These things should not happen in silos. So I would encourage you to think about doing that agency-wide across the organization assessment. Once you've identified what you want to get out of your assessment and your scope, that's when you should then pick your tool and your approach. There are lots and lots and lots of tools out there. Today, we are introducing you to the tool we built that's specific for community action, but it is by no means the only tool out there. It's not going to be appropriate for everybody's goals. So take a look at it. Consider, do you want to do a more rigorous type of assessment, or do you want to have some kind of third-party validation of what your, of your assessment? Just really spend some time looking for a tool that fits your needs and situation, and resources too. So from there, once you have your goal, your scope, your tool, then you want to think about your plan. Think about the logistics of how this will roll out in your agency. How will you approach it? How is data collected? Who is involved? I'm going to talk more about that in a second. What is your timeline? When does this need to be completed by? Maybe you're doing this assessment to inform a strategic planning process, for instance. And so you might have a timeline that you need to meet. You need to think about those things in advance and work backwards, right? Also think about your costs. Some of these assessments can come with a cost. And even if it's not a financial cost, they always come with a time budget. It always costs your human resources, your people's time to engage in this kind of assessment. And then from there, you need to communicate because you're going to be engaging your employees. You need to tell them what your goals are, what you're hoping to get out of this assessment. And another very important point here, I would say in any kind of assessment like this, where you're trying to understand, get a true reflection of your organization's functioning, you need to assure confidentiality. You know, people are not going to be willing to step forward and say some of the hard things we might need to hear if they're not sure that it will be held confidentially. So that is a very important assurance. So a quick note about who we should involve in the assessment. You know, it may not make sense for you to gather information from all of your employees, depending on your tool, the amount of, you know, effort that's needed in your assessment, and maybe the size of your organization. So I can understand where an agency might say, we're going to do, you know, a sample of our organization. But you need to make sure that if you're taking that approach, and even if you're not taking that approach, you want to put in some good effort to ensure that the folks who are responding in the assessment represent all major functions and programs within your agency, all levels within your agency, and I mean that from janitors to fiscal staff to bus drivers to caseworkers to leadership. Also, want to encourage you to think about all levels of engagement, and that is that, you know, you may have a group in your organization who is maybe not as connected or engaged for whatever reason. Those perspectives are just as valuable and important to gather in an assessment like this. And the last point is just to ensure that those who are engaged are representative of your organization. And I mean that from a racial equity standpoint. I mean that from a gender equity standpoint, from a socioeconomic standpoint. You know, make sure that the voices that you are lifting up are representative of the folks in your organization. So before we dive into the tool, I want to take a second because I see a question in the chat. Are you suggesting do an assessment other than the risk assessment and the organizational standards assessments? Both of these assessments across all areas of the agency. Yes, we are suggesting that. Your risk assessment is very broad, yes, across all functions of the organization, but it's focused on that risk aspect. The organizational standards assessments are looking for, looking that you are engaging in practices that are required to be a community action agency. What we're talking about here is assessing your organization's well-being and functioning so that you can understand where you might have gaps and inform some continuous quality improvement efforts. You know, org standards are great, risk assessment is great, but neither one of them are comprehensive of all of the things that a community action agency might engage in and areas where a community action agency can grow. And I'm not saying don't do those, you have to do those things too, but this is a different kind of assessment that we're talking about here. So I don't see any other questions. Guys, do keep them coming. We will pause and stop and answer questions as we go. So at this point then, I want to show you the new tool that we have developed to help you do this kind of assessment. As I mentioned, this is designed for use by community action agencies. It is based on those community action standards of excellence. You know, to the point about org standards. Org standards are baseline functioning, they're minimum requirements. And the standards of excellence articulate best-in-class practices. So we're going beyond those baseline practices and asking you to think about, how do I perform in terms of being an excellent agency? Where am I in terms of being an excellent agency? Our assessment tool specifically gathers staff perceptions of deployment of agency strategy. And one of the great things is that it is incorporated in the risk assessment portal with the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. So I am going to turn this over to Catherine to walk us through the new tool and show us all of its cool functions. So Catherine.
Thank you, Mary Beth. So now what you would do is you would go to that assessment and risk resources portal, which is at nonprofitrisk.org/cap. And for those of you that have been on the portal recently, you might have noticed this organizational assessment tile. up here. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to log into the portal. So if you go to the upper right hand portion of your screen, you'll click on that login button, and then it will open up where you will enter your email address and your password. For most of you, this is going to be your agency email address that was entered in here. And then you would just click on that green login button. Or if you forgot your password, you could also click on the forgot your password. On this portal, you can also add other team members if they need access as well. So from the home page on the far right, you will see the member benefits and portal tools. You'll click on that continue button, and that will take you to a new screen where you'll see portal tools on the right-hand side. And if you click on that add a user to my account, you'll be taken to a screen where you can fill out each person's profile information. Any area where you see that red asterisk is going to be a required field. And then at the very bottom of the screen, once you've filled everything out, there'll just be a continue button for you to push. And once you do this, it'll take you back to that home screen, where on the far left-hand side, you'll see the organizational assessment tile. And you'll simply click on that continue button, which will take you to a screen that will give you two choices where you can actually start filling out the organizational assessment, which it's almost like a survey, you'll see in a moment. Or if your team members have already taken the survey, you can see all of the team results in one area. So the first thing I'm going to show you is when you click on that organizational assessment tile, it lets you take the assessment. So as Mary Beth talked about earlier, this is more of kind of an informal survey that you can do more quickly. And it's based off of those different excellence categories where you can do a point in time assessment for each one of the staff members. So when you scroll further down the page, you'll see the 7 different categories that are based on the standards of excellence. And under each category, you'll be able to click on the plus button to expand the category, like you can see on the screen here. So this is category 2, strategic planning. And it gives you a brief description of what the standards of excellence says that category is, to give you an idea of what you're thinking about. And then you'll be asked questions related to that category of how each one of your staff members agrees or disagrees with a particular area. And we also have a comment area for each category where you can further expand on why you might have rated something. Because sometimes when you're just agreeing or disagreeing, there might be a specific reason that furthers the story versus just, I feel strongly one way or another. For each category, we also have that green update this category button that'll be on the right-hand side under each category heading. And this kind of saves everything you've already submitted. So if you have to walk away from your computer, you've already saved it, you don't have to worry about it. The other nice thing about it is that if you're only able to fill out part of it, on both the top and bottom of the screen, you'll have a place to save it. So there'll be this green Save My Assessment button, like I said, on both the top and the bottom of the screen. When you click that, it'll just take you out of the survey and you can close your browser and come back to it at any time. So now that you've done that, once everybody has filled out the survey, you can look at your team's results. So there are 2 ways to get to the team results. The first one is back on the home page, which was that nonprofitrisk.org/cap, and that left-hand tile that says organizational assessment. Once you'd clicked on that, on the right-hand side, you'd see the review agency aggregate results, and you'll have a continue button. The other way is if you're already in the survey area for the organizational assessment page, you'll notice that there'll be a blue button. Mary Beth, if you could click this slide for a second. There we go. A blue button that says see team results. That will also take you to a result page. So when you click into either one of those, then you will again see the different categories. So it'll be the 7 categories that are related to the categories of excellence. And you'll get to see how your team members have rated each question as a whole. And you can expand each one of the categories to see those results by just clicking on the plus hand button. And all the adding and math is, when you see that aggregate score, is based on how many team members answer the question. So in this example, only 1 person answered it. So that number would change and it automatically calculates everything for you. So you'll get the total results in there. Also, if you scroll to the bottom of the team aggregate results page, you will see a team totals category, which is on the next slide. That'll give you kind of a dashboard rating for each one. So you can do a quick look versus seeing each individual question to give you an idea so that you can know if you need to focus on something to spend more time, as Mary Beth talked about, kind of that continuous practice and commitment. So we all know everybody's busy and you don't always have time to focus on 7 different areas, but you might want to focus on, say, a customer focus at one point in time for folks. Then once you have all those results, you can kind of put areas into practice by using some of the recommendations we make in this assessment. So you can see those recommendations from 2 different screens. If you're on the organizational assessment screen, which is where you first took that survey, there's a green view team result, the view team report button. Also, that same button exists if you are on the team aggregate results page. One thing I did want to mention about the team aggregate results is we added a filter in there. So you can filter it by the different position types. So if you want to see what every single position that answered it did, you would just leave it on the default, or you can click on a drop down to select the certain position. You're only going to see the positions that filled out the survey. So if you didn't have any board members, for example, fill out the survey, then that just won't show in the drop down. But it's a good way to kind of see the lens. So the program leadership might see certain areas as very positive and everything's going great, but kind of the program staff and support might be like, well, you're missing these areas. And it's a good way to look at it through those different lenses. So when you do click on the view report, it will open a new tab in your browser window, and it gives you different recommendations at your fingertip based on your answers. So Mary Beth, when you click the next part, it will give you just more language on each one of the 7 categories. It'll also give you further articles or more reading if you want kind of more in-depth recommendations of where to take things further. And you can skip around on the areas you want to focus on it. Also, you don't just have to read this in your browser. If you click on the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a Word and a PDF icon. You can click on either one of those to download your whole report so you can share it different ways as opposed to just on your screen. And that was the main thing I had for those results. I'm going to turn it back over to Mary Beth to kind of talk to you about how to decode all of these recommendations.
And hey, Catherine, before I take back over, how about if we got a whole bunch of questions?
Did we? Okay.
Yeah.
I saw them popping. I just couldn't read.
Yeah. Folks saw the tool. They got excited and have some questions.
Oh,
so the first question is the tool accessible only to community action agencies and or employees? And so This tool was created for our members, and in order to get access to the portal, Catherine, stop me if I'm going off in the wrong direction, that portal access is only available to community action agencies. It is supported with funding from the Office of Community Services, so is only open for our community action agencies.
If you do have any trouble adding staff or anything, you can always reach out to myself or someone else. Mary Beth can help you at CAP, or anyone from the Nonprofit Risk Management Center are also here to help you.
Yes, and yes, please do contact us. A follow-up question I just saw is it accessible for state associations? Absolutely, this is accessible for state associations as well. It's for our network of community action. That's what I want to say. National partners too. We're all of our CSBG funded entities can absolutely use this tool. Catherine, there's a question about how do I know if I have an account set up already? How do I know if I have an account on the portal?
You can try if you think you know your login, or reach out to us. So if you've done any of the risk assessment on the portal, it's the same login. There's not separate logins for the organizational assessment or your risk assessment.
Yeah, that's a really important point, is that because it's on the same portal, it's one login, and that makes it very streamlined. And we hope will be helpful to you if you've had staff participate in your risk assessments before. All of them have accounts and are associated and can be associated with your account. So that makes this a much lighter lift, we hope, for all of you. There's a question about, can the team's responses be submitted anonymously?
Oh, yes, so they're all anonymous. It's just an aggregate. Now, if you've only had 2 people submit it, you know who those 2 people are, it's a little less anonymous, but the more people that submit, the more anonymous it's going to be. You can't go in and see that, say, Catherine submitted these answers or Mary Beth submitted that. It's just an aggregate score.
Yes, that was something that was very important for both of us, for NRMC and from the NCAP side, was to make sure that we had that ability to do anonymous feedback, because again, for this to be effective, for folks to feel comfortable sharing their perceptions, they have to be assured, you know, that there won't be blowback or repercussions from them sharing their perspectives. So there's a question, if you've done this in the past, could you do another?
Yes, we actually, I don't know if you quite noticed it on some of the screens, there's a version 1. See how it says survey version? You can just keep doing multiple versions of the survey to keep looking back at old results.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. You know, as we discussed, this is not meant to be a one and done. And in all likelihood, what you're going to get are some results that are going to tell you that you need to make some improvements in a given area. And you're going to want to go make those improvements, and then you're going to want to do another pulse check, right? You're going to see how have perceptions changed, and benchmark that over time. So this is a really great feature that you can, you know, do this multiple times, and it stores the different versions so you can compare over time. Catherine, there are a few more questions in the chat that I need to scroll through very quickly. Here's a question about knowing if the account is set up. Try the portal first. And if you have trouble, if you think you already have an account, you can always contact us and we're happy to help. There's a question, are we able to download the assessment prior to taking it?
So we did not set up a feature like that. The point of putting it online was so that it would save all the results for you and save you from that paper back and forth and having to put it in different places. If you just wanted to look at it in advance, the thing I could suggest is you could try to print the page, but you're going to have to expand each category separately. It's not really designed as a print it all off.
Yeah, and this is a good point at which I should say this tool is new. It is rolling out today. And we are also committed to continuous quality improvement, and we want your feedback. And I actually think that's a great suggestion to have maybe just a one page of the questions so that folks kind of know what to expect. Look, Catherine's writing it down now, and it'll we'll incorporate your feedback. So yeah, guys, as you're using this, if you see something, if you're not sure about a functionality, we really do want to hear from you. We want to make this really effective for you. So reach out to us. Are all participants able to see the team results?
So that is just set up for users that are considered what we call an admin. So there's generally one person in charge of the whole account that has that admin access.
Yeah. So that's a way to, so leadership or whoever that admin is will be able to, what's that word? Aggregate. There we go. There's the word. All of the results, and then share them out, with the group. And now we're going to talk about this in a minute, but one of the reasons for that is that, this is like anything, this is data, right? And it needs to be analyzed in order for it to be usable for decision making. And so, we wouldn't want just the results to be available to everybody, because there might be other context that is important to put alongside of the results. So that is how that function works. Would it be appropriate to start with your leadership team, or do you recommend a deeper dive with all staff? And I see Aaron responded to this, but I just want to speak it into the space. It might be appropriate, given your organization, you might want to start with your leadership, test it out, kind of see where leadership falls on this. And then, but back to that earlier conversation about the value of our employees as experts and understanding that different seats in the organization are going to see things in different ways. It's absolutely valuable to get your broader staff input. But as Aaron said, everyone should choose the road that works for them. This is not meant to be a one-size-fits-all approach by any means. There was a question about, we have 200 employees. To have them use the assessment, do I understand correctly that we would first have to enter their emails as team members? So the answer to that is, in order for them to be able to take the assessment, yes, they would have to be associated with your account. Now, back to that earlier point about who should be involved, when you have a staff of 200, you may decide that you want to maybe do a sample of your staff, or maybe you do want to do all 200. Catherine, I don't know if there's anything you want to offer up in terms of functionality there for inputting staff emails. Anything you want to add?
I would say if you want to do all 200 and they're not in there already, it might actually be easier to send it to us, because I think we can just upload it for you, as opposed to you having to hand type 200 of those. We would just need to know those key areas to get them entered. As far as a suggestion about how to approach it, I like the sample idea just to test it out, because each one of your individual agencies is going to handle things differently. And a lot of times you might have an agency that or a portion of your agency that has more time to focus on this. And they might do a good step of, we worked it in with the leadership and then the program support next. And it worked this way to have these conversations around it before you ask all 200. Just to give them a better framework of what works best within your organizational situation. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. There's also a comment that was a very good comment sent to us about that this tool, if you're thinking about those org standards, there is a requirement for agencies to do an agency-wide risk assessment. This is not an agency-wide risk assessment, and this would not meet standard 4.6. This is meant for a different purpose, to really understand where your organization lies in terms of its functioning, and to inform your continuous improvement efforts to make your organization stronger and build your capacity. So that is the purpose of the tool. It is not an agency-wide risk assessment. Let me see. Yes, and then there was a follow-up comment that if you have questions about what meets standard 4.6, you should talk to your state office. There was a question, do we have to sign up for Pathways to Excellence to access this? Meaning, will there be a cost to have access? And that answer is no. This is available to the entire network. Pathways agencies use this too, but by nature of being a community action agency and our great partnership with the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, we're able to offer this tool at no cost to community action agencies. And I should mention, through the funding from the Office of Community Services, that is how we are able to offer this to everyone at no cost in the network. I think we have reached the end of the questions. Keep them coming, guys. We love this part of it. Really fun. The conversation is fun. So with a couple minutes we have left, how about if I do a quick run through of some of the ways that you can use these results in your agency. And then guys, keep questions coming and we'll have a little bit of time at the end to answer any questions you have. So looking at your results, the recommendations that you get are going to be awesome. But before you jump into what you do, you need to spend some time with what your actual results say. Because remember, the results show the perceptions of the staff within your agency. And just like I said a minute ago, like any data, the results must be analyzed before you can decide what you're going to do with them. So when you're looking at your results, a few things you might want to look at. First is the consistency, right? Do we see that, we're pretty consistently scoring high in a domain or low in a domain or low on a particular practice or high on a particular practice? That will give you some assurance that this perception is pretty widely shared. You're always going to have outliers in your data. There's always going to be somebody who loves a process and someone who doesn't love it. But, really be looking for those where you have consistency and look for patterns. Also look, one of the great things that we added to the portal was the ability to look at this from different groups of employees' perceptions. So perhaps certain groups of employees share a common perception. That might give you a clue about where you might have a problem or something working really well with a particular practice. Certain categories may be high or low. You may have patterns across categories. So, I would encourage you to pay attention to the interconnectedness of the responses. Maybe do you have low results across engagement, employee engagement and results, the results domain. That might tell you something. Or high results across HR and process management. That might tell you something. So do look for those patterns and look for the interconnectedness across all of the domains. And another thing is that gut check, that anticipated results versus actual results alignment. So if you were expecting really great results and you didn't get them, or if you were expecting like, oh, I'm kind of nervous about this and they came back glowing, that is also information for you to use. And, a lack of alignment could indicate a disconnect between leadership and staff. It could also indicate some communication challenges within the organization. And I mean that both ways, up chain and down chain, and also upstream and downstream. And also, that challenge of the strategy or your approach versus how it actually rolled out and is deployed in your organization. That is something else you might find from your results. So whenever you're doing data analysis, it's my favorite word, you get to contextualize the results. And what we mean by that is, take this information, it's one data point. So what happens when we put that data point in the context of other information that we have about our organization? So maybe you have other indicators around, say, employee data. Maybe you have that really good staff engagement survey that gives you some more information that you can put alongside your HR results. Maybe you have other metrics or indicators of employee well-being, things like turnover rates and absenteeism. You can do the same thing with customer data, right? You all have satisfaction surveys, agency policies, or other results metrics, the outcomes of the people you serve and your efforts, your monitoring and audit reports. All of this is information that you can put these results into context with. So, really think about your results in relation to your agency strategic plan. Maybe you're doing some intentional work on one domain as part of your strategic plan that is leading to higher results, or maybe you're looking at an area because you've identified it that it's a space to grow. Also, consider your historic or current agency performance and environment. We know that current events impact results. How people are feeling. This is a survey of perception, so how people are feeling really impacts the results. Maybe you have new policies that are impacting your results, and also just recent improvement efforts and broader agency improvement, or your broader agency environment. I do want to give a word of caution here. Don't use contextualizing your results as an opportunity to explain away results that you did not anticipate. You cannot improve, we cannot improve if we do not listen. And it usually involves listening to some hard pills to swallow for us to really, make the deep improvements that are needed to spring us forward. So one of the other things that's going to happen when you complete this process is you're going to get several ideas, and you're going to see several areas where you can strengthen and make your processes even stronger and better, some areas where you have room to grow. But you cannot make all of those improvements at the same time. We don't want you to be overwhelmed and frozen. You're going to have to prioritize your results and focus on a few actions at a time. And a couple of options you can use for prioritization. You could look at doing some quick wins or low-hanging fruit that gives folks a little bit of a boost, some wind beneath your wings so that you can really sail and do some good deep work. Want to point out too that, if you're doing long-term kind of big picture improvement efforts, those quick wins are really important to the morale. We all know what it's like when you work on a big goal. It's like sometimes you just need a win. So think about how you're building in some quick wins into whatever improvement efforts you're engaging in. Also think about your strategic plan priorities. And maybe they are tied, maybe you're prioritizing action based on key performance indicators or your dashboard metrics. Or perhaps you're going to learn something about your organization and you're going to see an area that you need to begin to track intentionally, because we know what gets measured gets done, right? Also got to think about your funder requirements and priorities. Some of that might dictate areas that you focus on first. So our friends at NRMC made this great worksheet that you can access when you complete the assessment. And this worksheet helps you think through your prioritization and plan your actions for improvement. And it really just walks you through step-by-step prioritizing and planning action. And this is all available within the portal when you review your results. So as we are wrapping up, it's been a lot. It's been really fun. I don't see any other questions here, but don't go just yet. A couple more things to share with you. We talked about that assessment is not a one and done. You should really be revisiting your assessment at regular intervals or after improvement efforts in order to get an updated pulse check. Don't do this too often. It does take time. It might be free, but it takes time, and time is a precious resource. It takes energy. So, really think about what timing works well for your organization, and make sure you leave enough time between when you make an improvement and when you do another pulse check, because it takes a little while for things to really become systematized and normalized in your organization. And you want to make sure that your assessment picks up those new results. So we do have a couple of resources, and one in particular that I wanted to call out is that the National Community Action Partnership and the Nonprofit Risk Management Center have partnered again to offer all community action agencies free registration to the upcoming Risk Summit. So because of your affiliation with being a community action agency, you will get to attend this amazing conference for free. It is held virtually and held over 3 days throughout the year. And I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to talk to you a little bit about what you can expect if you want to attend.
So thank you, Mary Beth. So just real quick, so it's free to all of you, and it is 3 different dates. So you can still register even if you, for example, don't have any interest in the first one, the insurance fundamentals, if that's not really what you're looking for. We also have the risk management fundamentals that's happening on July 20th. And then if you're a little bit further in your progress and you want to talk a little bit more about the advanced risk management or enterprise risk management, that's the October 13th session. Don't feel intimidated by any of them. I promise you we're not planning on putting anybody on camera. So you can just sit back and relax and listen to the sessions if you have any interest in them at all. Another nice feature is for all of the sessions, they're going to be live on the date you see here. But if you're not available and you're still interested in the session, we will leave them up for 30 days on the site. So for example, that April 5th conference, it's going to be available through May 6th on the site. All you would need to do is register for it. And I believe Mary Beth has kind of distributed a flyer that gives a direct link to this for all of you, but we're happy to share that again, how you go and register for this conference. Again, it's coming up on Tuesday for the insurance fundamentals, and we'll be filling folks in. So if you forget about it and then you wake up Tuesday morning and say, hey, I want to come, when you register, we'll also be trying to keep adding folks in on that day of and can add you for questions. But we encourage you to take advantage of it. It's free, even if just one session is interesting to you. But anybody from your organization can listen to these. I will be on in the background, and folks at our actual office will be answering phone calls if you have any trouble and need help getting into it.
Yeah, and Catherine, we need to say thank you so much for doing this webinar with us the week before your conference. Oh my goodness, what a trooper you are. Thank you so much. And we really appreciate the ability to partner and bring this great resource to the network. So thank you to our friends at NRMC over and over and over again. Also want to call out that the risk assessment portal is there. You can do a free agency-wide risk assessment that is still available to you through the same portal that the organizational assessment tool lives on. You can access it from our online tools library, or you can go directly to nonprofitrisk.org/cap. So with that, we are at time. We are right on time. We need to say thank you all for attending. Please do reach out to us if you have any questions or thoughts. If you have feedback about the tool, send it to Catherine, send it to the partnership, and send it to any of us on the COE team. We are here to help. Taylor's putting a session evaluation into the chat. Please be sure to take the evaluation. We really value your feedback and input. Catherine, any last thoughts?
I hope you all take advantage of this free tool. Remember, you can do it in quick spurts. You don't have to feel overwhelmed to try to do it all at once or take all the recommendations at once. Think of it as just ways to help do steps at any time.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. We hope to see you real soon. Take care.